noticed that a lot of people around me, both clients and friends, and myself, have been thinking a lot about grief, about sort of a response to a lot of the collective uncertainty that exists right now. And I thought maybe we could take it in the carriage and explore a little more about grief, about how grief might impact us in our lives. Um, one thing that I'm aware of with grief is that there's many different types of grief. So I don't know. Do you want to have a whirl and?
Sure, yeah. I mean, this is definitely a complicated, it's multi-layered.
Yeah.
And maybe we can define for our listeners what grief is. I mean, I think, there are a lot of forms of grief, but I think at the base, at the foundation, it's essentially the loss of something that feels important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
it could be, the physical loss of someone we love, maybe even the loss of a fantasy or a dream,
Right.
loss of a relationship. And I was thinking, I was looking at the transition to menopause a little bit, and I was thinking about how even transitions carry grief. There's that loss of a previous self, a former self, and maybe all the things that were attached to that, or some of those things.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting because it's in the sort of change or in the sort of metamorphosis that we go through in several times in our lives. One of them, of course, largely that I'm certainly dealing with right now is menopause, and I think that's very interesting. It's the loss of an identity. Many different losses, physical losses. I agree with you about the sort of complexity of us as human beings and how when we experience a loss, we lose on so many different levels. So it might appear like a physical loss or a change, like let's say menopause, but then the different levels that we experience loss and grief on, maybe emotional, spiritual losses, social losses. It's so multi-dimensional when we experience a loss or change. I think something else I wanted to, what I was thinking about with grief was just also anticipatory grief. There are different types of grief. So you would have acute grief when we lose something immediate, right? And then maybe there's chronic grief, something that we've carried with us for a long time when we've lost something or someone. And then, there's sort of anticipatory grief where where we're thinking about what we may lose with, let's say, like a diagnosis of an illness or even old age. As we're aging, we sort of begin to anticipate the kinds of losses and grief we may experience along the way. So it's pretty deep.
Yeah. And we live in a culture that I think, the topic of grief it's so charged, and people have a difficult time kind of sitting in what's uncomfortable. Right?
Absolutely.
And so what is the kind of narrative and the story around what we say to people who are grieving, right? We try to mask it in these memes
Attitudes.
that are actually, I think they don't, not only are they not helpful at all, but I think they can sometimes be shame-inducing.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's very interesting. I think they can be, and they can be so misattuned to what the person is experiencing that it can actually be insulting. I mean, I think that some of those, because it's such a personal experience, but also such a universal experience because we all grieve. I think that part of, what you're speaking about with this kind of denial or this avoidance of, or this discomfort with being able to like sit into grief is because perhaps that's one of the largest top things that we have to come to terms with as humans, is that it is inevitable that we will we will face grief, we will face loss. And so the avoidance is somewhat existential, like this sort of avoidance of facing the reality of our limitations of being human. And yet it's so universal. It connects us to humanity. I think that when you have a loss, when you grieve, you come face to face with the feeling of being human, of your limitations. Very grounding. It's very humbling when you experience something that shakes you so deeply from the inside.
Well, we feel alive. So as much as grief, like it can feel like, death by 1,000 cuts, right? I mean, it's so painful. But it's also a reminder that we are so human and we are feeling and we are in this moment, right? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And not only does it enlighten us to our own pain, but it also has the potential to bring us empathy, because suddenly we realize that if we're able to kind of stretch our understanding that this is not only just happening to me, but that this is part of the human condition, and that we all suffer, we all will grieve, we will all lose in this life. Um,
yes. I think I was listening to Brene Brown at some point a while ago, and she was talking about how grief and growth sort of go together, right? And at first I wasn't sure what she was saying there,
Right.
because I think in my mind I was hearing, oh, is this someone else that's going to tell us, like, oh, loss has a purpose and you will grow from this and there's always a silver lining. But that actually wasn't her messaging at all. She was really kind of pointing to the fact that we have to be willing to go through it, to come out the other side, right? To sit with what's uncomfortable. And and grief is not linear, right? So I think the way we treat it in this culture, it's like, someone is grieving an incredible loss. Oh, we'll take 2 weeks off of work, as though 2 weeks is going to be enough time. I mean, there are no rules in terms of what time looks like, but it's not like we ever get over the loss.
I don't think so either.
We've just learned how to integrate it, perhaps.
100%. We've learned how to expand or to grow. Using Brene Brown's analogies, is to grow and expand our capacity to live with that reality.
Yes.
Because it's like the reality is a medicine that brings you 100% into your experience and out of the sort of fantasy of what life should be. Because I think people feel like what's wrong that I'm having such a difficult time? What's wrong with me? Why is this happening to me? When we can drop into this understanding that this is what it means to be human, is to learn how to, in your words, suffer gracefully, how to actually embody our experience of limitation and pain in a graceful way. I also think that this thing about grief and growth, and I forget who says this, but this thing about the capacity to feel pain, the depth of the pain, enables us to feel those heights of joy.
Sure, there's no love without grief. We can't grieve for something that we haven't loved. So our capacity to feel deeply sad and be in the depths of grief is also very much connected to our capacity to love wholeheartedly, fully.
Yeah,
so
absolutely, so deep. And I also just wanted to talk a little bit about, you said that there is no that it's not linear. Getting through grief is not linear, and that people will go through their own process. But of course, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who does who's given such insight into the grieving process, speaks about the different stages that we go through in grief. What I find really helpful about the stages is that it sort of normalizes the experience, because of course, first, when you have a loss, you're going to have a shock. There's going to be denial. It's very hard to come to terms with the reality, the shifting reality that happens so quickly when we lose something. Um, and that symptoms of denial might be hidden because, we're losing things all the time. Like you say, it might not be the bigger losses, like the loss of a person, but even if you lose your purse or you misplace your purse, or there's grief involved, there's a loss.
The initial
process.
panic, the initial, my gosh, I need this. I must find this. Yeah. So
Exactly.
there's a trauma actually with, I mean, maybe not with some of the smaller things, but it is grief.
It is
when we lose something important, that is traumatic.
Yeah, and they might be small T's and big T's, small traumas or bigger traumas, depending on what it is. But so what I wanted to say about the process of going through the stages of grief, the denial, just to know that there are these stages and to become aware, because sometimes we're not aware that we've lost something, but let's say we're becoming very forgetful, or we can't remember where we put things, or there might be a question like, is there something that we're denying or avoiding facing that we've lost? Because we go into the sort of override, and like you say, the culture is not comfortable with us grieving in any way at all. So it's stiff upper lip, put up your chin, whatever, eat cake and carry on, or whatever these memes say. And in no ways does it actually, it feeds that denial and that avoidance. But denial is actually a stage that we have to give ourselves that grace, right, when something happens, to give ourselves a chance before we can really digest what has happened to us. So denial in and of itself is just the first stage. Or we can get stuck in these stages too.
Yes.
But denial is necessary to help us adjust to the new reality.
Yes. But like you were saying, these stages aren't necessarily linear.
No.
Right?
No.
And I think that the way she outlines them are more linear. So I think sometimes there's some confusion with people who are grieving. Like, am I ever going to feel angry? Am I ever going to feel, or, it's just not linear.
It's not linear, and also because we lose on so many different levels, we may be in denial regarding the kind of spiritual loss, but maybe we're already in bargaining or depression regarding the physical loss. So I think because we lose on so many different levels, that we're going through such a complex process of digesting this new reality and adjusting, as you say, to making space for this new way of being.
Which, in a sense, I mean, not only have we lost the person, the object, the fantasy, the relationship, but we've also lost perhaps part of ourselves in that, right?
So exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which sometimes those losses, the deeper sort of inner process, only happens much later. And so I think that's interesting what you're saying, that it's not a linear, it's not going to take, there's not a
timetable. Yeah.
There's no timetable, because you might be adjusting to the fact that that person doesn't sleep next to you in the bed anymore, but then there's so much inner work that might happen as you go on.
Right. So then the question kind of becomes, what happens with unprocessed grief?
Yeah.
I can't remember where I heard this, but the acronym THUG, traumatized human, unable to grieve.
Oh, I love that.
And I thought that was really interesting. So when we
that's so interesting.
haven't processed something, when we have avoided what's difficult, how does it then manifest in the world? What does that look like? Well, it looks like not trusting others. It looks like vengeance. It looks like anger. It looks like numbness, right? Of course, addiction and consumerism we could throw in there as well as these. So our society kind of enables this denial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Running away from the reality, and constantly chasing after something else, something to make it better. Like actually my mentor from hospice, because I worked at hospice for several years, she always says putting sugar on shit. You just kind of spice it up a little, you put a little bit of sweetness on there, and just keep on going. But what I also think is interesting about what you're saying is that the phases of loss, you can get stuck in those phases. So I think that's how it presents in the world. So you might get stuck in denial. You could live your entire life uh, in denial, or you could live your entire life in anger, where you are, have this furious outlook on life, and it can manifest into some serious, behavior issues in the world. Um, and in fact, anger is seen as such an acceptable emotion in our world. Like somehow you're allowed to be angry about things, but you're not allowed to be sad. You're not allowed to, which is the phases, right? Or denial, anger, bargaining, which is an interesting one we should talk about. And then we go from bargaining into depression. And maybe it's not, like you say, a linear process, but it's something we have to get to that place of depression. We have to get to that place of feeling the sadness, so that we can like move into what might be acceptance or a readjustment, a reorientation in our lives.
Well, anger is much less vulnerable, right? It's easier to be angry than it is to feel the depths of our sorrow.
So true. Absolutely.
And we shy away from anything that feels vulnerable.
Exactly. It's such a great mask. Anger is such armor. It's an incredible armor, and like you say, it can really cause a lot of. So perhaps a lot of what goes on in the world is just unprocessed grief.
Collective grief.
Yeah. Collective grief that hasn't been processed. I think we should have like a day that honors grief, a day that allows people to feel, to get into feeling. And I think it's interesting, the Jewish mourning process, because I think mourning is a verb. Mourning is what you do with grief. Grief is a feeling, and mourning is perhaps what you do with it. I know many cultures have different practices and traditions, but I do appreciate the Jewish year-long shiva experience or mourning process, because it actually demarcates a time and a ritualistic space for you to actually sit with the pain and be in that space. It's like you're given permission by your community to sit in that space and come to terms with change. Whereas I think in a lot of other, certainly just in kind of Western material society, we just stiff upper lip it, and you've got a couple of days off, and then you just, it's been 6 months, you should be over that already.
Yeah, we need ritual.
Yeah, we need ritual.
And I suppose, we do have funerals, and we have celebrations of life and these kinds of things. I think to honor the people that are mourning as well as the people who have passed.
Right.
But it does feel so temporary, right? Like, okay, the funeral happened last weekend. A month later, how are we doing? Have we moved on? Are we feeling stronger?
Are you productive again? Are you back in the world and being productive, doing, keeping busy, doing all the things that you need to do? And I'm not saying that one shouldn't have like those sort of mundane world, struck the mundane worldly tasks, because I think that does help too when you, when you first come across it, when you first experience a loss. I think it does help to have a sort of a feeling of a structure in the world. Like, in the morning I, wake up, have my tea, then I, whatever, go for a walk or whatever. Those things really help when it feels like nothing that you knew before, that nothing makes sense anymore.
Right.
But then I agree with you, we need these rituals, we need to stop. We need, like when, they always say the first year of a loss is really difficult, because you're going to go through all those regular, seasonal changes and holidays and all those things. You have to go through that whole year long. But don't shy away from it. I suggest just, make a point of bringing a photograph of that person, or making a little altar to honor that person. Do a ritual. You don't have to repress it. You don't have to push those feelings down. They're going to come out sideways, or in an unexpected moment when you're supposed to be holding it together, and you hear a song and you fall apart.
You lose it. Yeah.
You lose it.
I just feel like we need more cultural support.
Right.
And understanding of what people who are grieving need.
Yes, I agree. Yeah,
You know, but again, it comes sort of back to our own discomfort. You know, when someone's grieving, we sort of move into how do I fix this? How do I make this better? I'm feeling uncomfortable. What can I say to sort of ease the situation at hand? But I mean, there's nothing like the power of presence. When you know, that's really what people need. They don't need these sort of empty solutions.
Because you've always got to ask, whose need is it? Like whenever you're going to see somebody who's experienced a loss, ask yourself, whose need is it for me to say this? Is it my need? Like I need to say this to you because I feel uncomfortable? And really ask yourself, what is the person who's going through this loss? What do they need from me? And I think you really have hit it there, Paige, about the presence.
Yeah.
I actually was listening to a podcast with Nick Cave, and do you know he lost, I think his 15-year-old son fell off a cliff when they were, I think, hiking or something in England, and he's lost a second son too, actually at age 30. And the first son that he lost has a twin, so the twin survived. But you know, he was talking about grief, and he was talking about his losses, and he said, you know, he remembered the first time he ever went to a cafe to order a coffee, and he's obviously famous, he's a celebrity, everybody knows him, and so you know he's standing in the line, and everybody's aware that Nick Cave is here and that he's had this loss. Everybody knows about it, and he said he got to the front, and the woman's like, "What do you want?" And he said, like, "I know her." You know, I know this person, but the way she asked me, like, just in such a, you know, uncomfortable, so awkward and uncomfortable. But he said, when she served him the drink and he paid and he took the change, she took his hand and she just squeezed his hand. And he said that was the biggest, it had such an impact on him because it was like,
I see
we're
you.
human. And
I
see
see you.
We're
I get it.
Human. I get it.
Yeah.
I know how hard this must be. And, you know, so to your point about presence and just vulnerability, opening up to sitting with somebody who's in pain, that it's okay to just be together in an uncomfortable place without knowing what words to say or how to make it better, because we can't. So one thing that I've done, or that I feel really is helpful, is first of all what we spoke about with ritual. So just to kind of go back onto that, like that it's really important to create rituals that allow you to feel. So I think even things like actually giving yourself a time to grieve, like maybe every day you're going to listen to a song, create yourself like a sad playlist that you're going to sit there and just give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to just cry, because life moves on, which is the other thing about grief, right, is that everything looks exactly the same, but you don't feel the same. So I would say make some time for that. And then also just knowing that it's normal, like normalizing that what you're going through, whether you're denying, whether you're angry, whether you're bargaining. You know, bargaining is such a big phase that I think for us to understand, you know, we're trying to, well, if I go to, you know, if I stop eating meat, then will this make me feel better, or will I get it back? Or you know, bargaining is such a huge phase that we go through, but that it's normal again, that each one of the phases. So to just kind of normalize that what we're experiencing is normal, a normal reaction to a loss situation. So those are some of the things that I can think of that we can, you know.
Yeah, I love those.
Away.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
One thing I have found helpful when people are in grief or are like in my office for a session is giving them the space, like the container, to tell stories about the departed, right?
Absolutely.
Like, tell me how, you know, how were they funny? How did they make you laugh? What did they love about life? What did you love about your connection? Because, you know, in the end, people want to remember like the good stuff. And I think that there's really a value, a healing value in being able to tell those stories.
I love that. Yeah, I love that, because also I think that your relationship, if we're talking about the loss of a person, your relationship with that person is not over. Your relationship with them continues. Correct. And so, yeah, to take the space and even to write about memories and to remember them at different occasions, and of course have the space to really share those stories.
Yeah.
even in a ritualistic way.
Yeah.
Because the other thing about the Jewish mourning process is you have something every year on the anniversary of that person's death. You light a candle to remember them, and around that time you are meant to tell stories and talk about them. So sort of building these rituals into our lives that give us permission to continue our relationship and to digest.